What my daughter-in-law Patricia didn't know, as she spread brochures for Sunset Manor Assisted Living across my kitchen table, was that in exactly 8 weeks, my 15-acre lakefront estate would be transformed into the most exclusive wellness resort in Northern California, with a permanent reservation list that would make her and my son's real estate dreams impossible forever, while generating me $2 million annually in pure profit. Before we dive into this incredible story of family greed meeting entrepreneurial genius, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me about the most ridiculous thing someone has ever said you were too old to handle, and subscribe because you're going to want to see how a 70-year-old woman turned attempted elder abuse into a business empire that would make Silicon Valley executives weep with envy. My name is Victoria Clearwater. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 18 months ago when my world shifted in ways that even my decades as a successful hospitality consultant couldn't have prepared me for. For 45 years, I had been married to Thomas Clearwater, a brilliant environmental engineer who spent his career designing sustainable water systems, while I built and managed luxury resorts across 3 continents. We lived what most people would consider a charmed life on our breathtaking property in Mendocino County, California. 15 acres of pristine lakefront land, with panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean just 3 miles away. But let me be absolutely clear about something from the start. I wasn't just Thomas's wife or my family's convenient elderly relative. I was a woman with 4 decades of hospitality industry experience, a master's degree in business administration from Stanford, and a track record of turning struggling properties into profitable enterprises that employed hundreds of people and served thousands of satisfied guests. I had personally designed, launched, and managed 7 different resort properties across California, Hawaii, and Costa Rica. My expertise included everything from sustainable building practices and organic farming operations to luxury spa services and 5-star dining experiences. I spoke fluent Spanish and Italian, held certifications in permaculture design and wellness, program development, and had been quietly managing our family's real estate investments with a level of strategic thinking that had generated substantial wealth over the decades. During my consulting career, I had developed relationships with architects, contractors, organic farmers, wellness practitioners, and hospitality professionals throughout the West Coast. I understood zoning laws, environmental regulations, and the complex world of boutique hospitality in ways that extended far beyond theoretical knowledge. I had successfully navigated county planning commissions, state environmental agencies, and luxury tourism markets. These skills would prove more valuable than anyone in my family could have imagined. Our property wasn't just any piece of land. It was a meticulously planned and developed sustainable paradise that Thomas and I had spent 32 years creating from what had originally been abandoned ranch land. We hadn't just bought acreage. We had transformed a degraded landscape into a showcase of environmental restoration and thoughtful development that was regularly featured in architectural and sustainability publications. The main house sat on a gentle rise overlooking Crystal Lake, a pristine 4-acre spring-fed lake that we had restored from a cattle pond into a swimming and boating paradise with crystal clear water and carefully maintained natural edges. The house itself was a stunning example of sustainable luxury. 4,200 square feet of reclaimed timber and local stone, with solar panels, geothermal heating, and a gray water system that supported extensive organic gardens. Beyond the main house, our property included a fully equipped guest cottage, a restored 1920s barn that Thomas had converted into a workshop and event space, organic vegetable gardens that supplied most of our food, a small vineyard producing award-winning Pinot Noir, and hiking trails that wound through oak groves and meadows down to our private beach access on the Mendocino coast. But here's what made this property truly extraordinary. Every building, every garden, every trail, and every restoration project had been carefully planned and executed by Thomas and me over 3 decades of hands-on work. We had invested not just our money, but our expertise, our physical labor, and our shared vision of sustainable living into creating something that was both profitable as a demonstration site and deeply meaningful as our family home. Thomas had designed innovative water management systems that captured rainwater, filtered gray water through constructed wetlands, and maintained the lake's ecosystem in perfect balance. I had created gardens that provided food, medicine, and beauty, while supporting local wildlife and demonstrating permaculture principles. Together, we had built something that environmental groups, agricultural extension offices, and sustainability researchers used as an educational model. More importantly, this property was entirely mine. When Thomas passed away 2 years ago after a brief but courageous battle with ALS, he left everything to me in a will that had been carefully crafted by our attorney, Miranda Westfield, who had been our friend and legal counsel for over 15 years. The land, our investment portfolio, Thomas's consulting business, our various savings accounts, and his substantial life insurance policies, all of it became mine to manage as I saw fit. This wasn't an accident or oversight. Thomas and I had discussed our estate planning thoroughly, updating our wills every few years as our assets grew and our understanding of our legacy evolved. Thomas insisted that everything go to me because, as he told Miranda during our final will revision, Victoria has been the business strategist of this partnership since day one. She'll know exactly how to honor what we've built while creating something even more meaningful for the future. He was absolutely right. I had been the one managing our real estate investments for the last 25 years of our marriage. While Thomas focused on his engineering consulting and our property's infrastructure, I had been researching sustainable business opportunities, managing our retirement accounts, and developing the long-term vision that allowed us to live comfortably, while building substantial wealth and environmental impact. By the time Thomas died, our net worth was approximately $3.8 million. The property was worth $2.2 million. We had $1.1 million in various investment accounts, $300,000 in Thomas's business assets, and $200,000 in life insurance proceeds. We also owned a small commercial building in nearby Mendocino that housed a popular cafe and generated steady rental income. I mention these numbers not to boast, but to establish something crucial. I was not a poor widow dependent on my family's charity or guidance. I was a financially secure, property-owning woman who had spent decades making smart decisions about money, land, and business development. My son David was our only child, born when I was 35, and Thomas was 38. We had tried for several years to have children, experiencing 2 miscarriages and the heartbreak of fertility treatments before David finally arrived healthy and perfect. When he did, we devoted ourselves to raising him with an appreciation for nature, sustainability, and the value of meaningful work. Perhaps we devoted too much. In retrospect, I can see that we may have provided David with too many advantages, without requiring enough personal responsibility in return. But at the time, we were simply parents who wanted to give our only child every opportunity to develop his talents and find his own path to fulfillment. David was undeniably intelligent. He excelled academically through high school, received a partial scholarship to UC Santa Barbara, where he studied environmental economics and graduated with solid grades. During college, he interned with environmental consulting firms and seemed interested in following a path that would combine financial success with environmental impact. But somewhere during his post-college years, particularly after he moved to San Francisco and started working in tech marketing, David developed an attitude toward money and success that troubled both Thomas and me. He began to view our sustainable lifestyle as quaint rather than meaningful, dismissing careers focused on environmental work as economically limiting and describing our property as beautiful but underutilized from an investment perspective. "Mom, you and Dad have created something amazing here," he would say during visits home. "But you're not maximizing its economic potential. This property could be generating serious income if you developed it properly." "David, we're not interested." in developing it. We're interested in preserving it and demonstrating sustainable living practices. But that's so limiting. You could build luxury cabins, create a glamping operation, maybe even subdivide some of the less sensitive areas. You're sitting on millions of dollars in unrealized value. These conversations revealed a fundamental disconnect between David's emerging worldview and the values that Thomas and I had tried to instill in him. He was beginning to see everything, including our life's work, primarily through the lens of financial optimization rather than environmental stewardship or personal fulfillment. After college, David moved to San Francisco and worked for several tech companies, eventually landing a well-paying position as a marketing director for a startup that developed apps for real estate investors. He seemed to be building a successful, independent life, earning good money, living in a nice apartment in the Mission District, and dating regularly. 3 years ago, he married Patricia Chen, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties in Manor County. I wanted to like Patricia. She was 32 years old, attractive, well-educated, and seemed to make David happy. She had grown up in Palo Alto, earned her real estate license after college, and was apparently quite successful selling expensive homes to tech executives who wanted to live in beautiful surroundings while commuting to Silicon Valley. But from the beginning, something about Patricia's attitude toward our family and our property made me uncomfortable. Unlike previous girlfriends who had shown genuine interest in our sustainability work and seemed to appreciate the beauty and thoughtfulness of what Thomas and I had created, Patricia viewed our property primarily as a real estate asset that was being wasted on an elderly couple who didn't understand its true potential. During their first visit to introduce Patricia to our property, she spent most of the weekend taking photographs and asking detailed questions about acreage, zoning, regulations, water rights, and development possibilities. She showed little interest in our gardens, our restoration work, or the educational programs we hosted for environmental groups. "This property is absolutely stunning," she told me as we stood on the deck overlooking the lake. "The views are incredible. The privacy is perfect, and the development potential is extraordinary. You could easily subdivide this into 5 or 6 luxury home sites and still maintain privacy for the main house." "Patricia, we have no interest in subdividing the property. We've spent 30 years creating it as an integrated ecosystem." Of course not now. But you have to think about the future. David and I could help you develop a long-term plan that would maximize the property's value while preserving the parts that are most important to you. The conversation revealed that Patricia was already thinking about our property as something she and David would eventually inherit and develop, rather than as our current home that we intended to preserve and protect. But what really troubled me was Patricia's attitude toward Thomas during his illness. As his ALS progressed and he required more care, Patricia began making comments about the burden of maintaining such a large property and suggesting that we should consider transitioning to a more manageable living situation. "Victoria, I know you love this place," she said during one particularly difficult visit when Thomas was having trouble walking. "But you have to be realistic about the future. This property requires constant maintenance, and as you and Thomas get older, it's going to become impossible to manage. Patricia, we have contractors and gardeners who help with maintenance, and I'm perfectly capable of managing the property. But what happens when Thomas—" She paused delicately. "What happens when you're here alone? You can't possibly handle 15 acres by yourself." Patricia was suggesting that I should start planning for widowhood by downsizing my life and moving away from the property that represented my life's work. She seemed to view Thomas's illness as an opportunity to plant seeds about my future need for their guidance and assistance. After Thomas died, Patricia and David's visits became more frequent and more focused on what they called helping me adjust to my new situation. But their version of help involved constant suggestions about how I should simplify my life, reduce my responsibilities, and make decisions that would set me up for success as I age. The suggestions started small but gradually became more invasive and presumptuous. David thought I should hire a property management company to handle maintenance and repairs. Patricia suggested I should consider selling the vineyard because wine production is too complicated for one person to manage. They both worried about me living alone in such an isolated location. "Mom, we just want you to be safe and comfortable," David would say when I expressed resistance to their suggestions. "This property is beautiful, but it's also a lot of responsibility. Wouldn't it be easier to find something smaller and more manageable?" "David, I'm perfectly comfortable managing this property. I've been doing it for 30 years. But you've never done it alone. Dad handled all the technical systems and heavy maintenance. Are you really prepared to coordinate contractors, manage the water systems, handle property taxes and insurance, and deal with all the regulatory requirements?" David was suggesting that I was incapable of managing tasks that I had actually been handling for decades, while Thomas focused on his consulting work. He seemed to have forgotten that I was the one who had managed our business affairs, coordinated contractors, and handled regulatory compliance throughout our marriage. But the most revealing conversations happened around 6 months after Thomas's death, when Patricia began raising the topic of long-term planning with increasing frequency and urgency. "Victoria, David, and I have been thinking about your situation, and we're concerned about what happens as you get older," she said during a Sunday dinner that I had prepared for them in my own dining room. "This property is going to become increasingly difficult to maintain, and you're going to need more support and assistance." "What kind of support and assistance?" "Well, eventually you'll probably need help with daily activities, medical care, social interaction. Right now you're healthy and independent, but that's going to change." Patricia was suggesting that my future decline was inevitable and that I should begin planning for dependence and incapacity rather than continued independence and competence. "Patricia, I'm 68 years old and in excellent health. I'm not planning for incapacity." "Of course not. But Victoria, you have to be realistic about aging. Even healthy people eventually need more support. Wouldn't it be better to plan ahead rather than wait for a crisis?" The conversation continued with Patricia and David presenting increasingly detailed arguments about why I should consider transitioning to a living situation that would be more appropriate for my stage of life. But the most troubling aspect of Patricia's concern was how she had begun positioning herself as an expert on my needs and capabilities. During one particularly condescending conversation, she actually brought printed materials about various senior living facilities in the area. "I've done some research on options that might work for someone in your situation," she said, arranging glossy brochures across my dining room table like she was presenting a real estate portfolio. "There are some really nice places that specialize in active seniors who want to maintain their independence while having access to support services." The brochures featured smiling elderly people engaged in crafts, gentle exercise classes, and organized social activities. The facilities looked pleasant enough, but they were clearly designed for people who had given up managing their own lives and were content to have their days structured by someone else's schedule. "Patricia, I'm not interested in moving to a facility. I know it seems scary to think about change, but Victoria, you have to consider what's realistic for your future. These places offer medical support, social activities, meal services, housekeeping, all the things that are going to become harder for you to manage on your own. I don't need help managing meals, housekeeping, or social activities. But what happens when you do? What happens if you fall and can't get help? What happens if you forget to take medications or have a medical emergency or just can't handle the physical demands of maintaining this property?" Patricia was painting a picture of inevitable decline and dependence that bore no relationship to my actual health or capabilities. At 68, I was hiking 5 miles several times a week, managing complex business relationships, and maintaining a property that required both physical stamina and mental acuity. "Patricia, I'm in excellent health and have no intention of planning for incapacity." "But Victoria, being realistic about aging isn't planning for incapacity. It's planning for changes that happen to everyone, Even the healthiest people eventually need more support. David joined the conversation with what seemed like a rehearsed set of talking points about quality of life and peace of mind. Mom, we're not saying you need assisted living now. We're saying you should start thinking about transitions that would make sense over the next few years. Maybe something like a continuing care community where you could start an independent living and have access to more services as you need them. What I need is to continue living in my own home, on my own land, doing work that I find meaningful. But, Mom, is it really meaningful if it's just you? When Dad was alive, you were demonstrating sustainable living and hosting educational programs. Now you're just maintaining a property that nobody except you gets to benefit from. David was suggesting that my life had lost meaning when Thomas died, and that continuing to live independently was somehow selfish rather than an expression of my right to self-determination. David, I'm still hosting educational groups. Still. Maintaining the demonstration gardens. Still producing wine and food. The work hasn't stopped just because your father died. But it's not the same, Mom. You can't do everything that you and Dad did together. And honestly, maintaining all this just for yourself seems like a lot of work for a diminishing return. The phrase diminishing return revealed how David was thinking about my life, as an investment that was no longer generating adequate profit, rather than as a human experience that had value independent of its utility to others. Patricia reinforced David's economic framing with her own analysis of my situation. Victoria, from a purely practical standpoint, this property requires a significant financial investment every year for maintenance, taxes, insurance, and improvements. You're spending money on a lifestyle that's becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, and that doesn't really fit your current life stage. My current life stage? Well, you're entering a phase where simplicity and security should be higher priorities than projects and responsibilities. Most people your age are looking for ways to reduce stress and enjoy their retirement, not maintain complex properties and manage business operations. Patricia was suggesting that my age automatically made me a candidate for simplicity and security, rather than continued engagement with meaningful work and creative challenges. Patricia, I'm not most people my age. I'm someone who has built a successful career managing complex properties and business operations, and I'm not ready to retire from work that I find fulfilling. But Victoria, there's a difference between being capable and being realistic about what makes sense at this stage of life. Even if you can manage everything now, you have to think about what happens when that changes. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Patricia and David presenting increasingly detailed arguments about why my current lifestyle was unsustainable and why I should begin planning for a more appropriate living situation. They talked about the physical demands of property maintenance, the social isolation of rural living, the financial burden of maintaining a large property, and the potential risks of living alone in a remote location. Every aspect of my life that I found meaningful and fulfilling was reframed as a problem that needed to be solved through downsizing and institutionalization. But what troubled me most was how they presented their concern as care while systematically undermining my autonomy and decision-making authority. They weren't asking what I wanted or what would make me happy. They were telling me what they thought was best for me based on their assumptions about aging and their own priorities about property development. During this same period, I began noticing that Patricia was taking photographs of different areas of our property during their visits, always with explanations about wanting to remember the beautiful details or showing friends what an amazing place this is. But the photographs seemed focused on the development potential rather than the environmental features that Thomas and I had worked so hard to create and preserve. I also discovered that Patricia had been making inquiries about our property with local real estate agents, ostensibly to understand the current market value for insurance purposes. When I asked her about this, she explained that she was just trying to be helpful by ensuring that our property insurance reflected current replacement costs. Victoria, I noticed that your homeowner's policy might not fully cover the replacement value of your improvements. Property values have increased significantly in this area, and you want to make sure you're adequately protected. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't fully account for why she was asking detailed questions about subdivision potential, zoning variances, and commercial development possibilities. The most revealing incident happened during a family dinner when Patricia received a phone call from a client and stepped outside to take it. Through the open window, I could hear her describing a spectacular lakefront property that might become available for development in the next few years. It's not officially on the market yet, but the owner is elderly and likely to need to make some decisions about her living situation soon, Patricia was saying. 15 acres, private lake, ocean views, incredible development potential. The current owner has it set up as some kind of environmental demonstration site, but it could easily be converted to luxury residential or boutique hospitality. Patricia was marketing my property to potential buyers as if my displacement from it was inevitable, rather than a decision that I would make based on my own preferences and priorities. When she returned from the phone call, I asked her directly about the conversation. Patricia, were you just discussing my property with a client? Oh, that was just a general conversation about properties in the area. My client is interested in this part of the coast, and I was describing the kind of amazing places that exist here. It sounded like you were describing my property specifically as something that might become available for development. I wasn't suggesting that your property is for sale, Victoria. I was just explaining to a client what kind of incredible properties exist in this area and how rare they are. But her explanation didn't match what I had overheard about elderly owners needing to make decisions about their living situations. These incidents, combined with the increasing pressure about retirement home research, began to paint a clear picture of Patricia and David's long-term strategy. They weren't just concerned about my welfare. They were actively planning for my displacement from my property so they could inherit and develop it according to their own financial priorities. The strategy seemed to involve convincing me that I was incapable of managing my current lifestyle, that my age made continued independence unrealistic, and that moving to a retirement facility would be in my own best interest. Once I was relocated and they inherited the property, they could pursue the subdivision and development that Patricia had been researching and marketing to her real estate clients. But what Patricia and David didn't know was that while they were developing their plans for my future and their inheritance, I had been having some very different conversations with some very strategic people in the hospitality and wellness industries. 3 months after Thomas's death, I had reconnected with former colleagues and started exploring opportunities to transform our property into something that would honor our environmental work while generating substantial income and providing meaningful employment for local people. I had been quietly researching boutique wellness retreats, sustainable tourism operations, and eco-luxury resorts that were thriving in similar coastal California locations. I had also been consulting with architects who specialized in sustainable hospitality design, permaculture consultants who could help expand our food production systems, and business development specialists who understood the luxury wellness market. My decades of hospitality experience, combined with the unique features of our property, suggested possibilities that were far more exciting and profitable than anything Patricia and David were envisioning. Most importantly, I had been working with our attorney, Miranda Westfield, to ensure that my property was protected from any attempts to have me declared incompetent or unable to manage my own affairs. Miranda had helped me establish a comprehensive estate plan that would preserve my autonomy while protecting my assets from family members who might try to pressure me into decisions that served their interests rather than mine. But I wasn't ready to reveal any of these plans yet. I wanted to see how far Patricia and David would go with their campaign to convince me that I was too old and incapable to manage my own life. I wanted to understand exactly what they were planning for my property and my future before I showed them what I was actually capable of achieving. Because while they were researching retirement homes and calculating development profits, I was designing a business plan that would transform their inheritance expectations into my entrepreneurial triumph. The property they viewed as an underutilized asset waiting for their management was about to become the foundation for a business empire that would make their real estate commissions look like pocket change. And their assumptions about my declining capabilities were about to become very expensive for their development dreams. What they didn't realize was that dismissing a 68-year-old woman with 4 decades of hospitality expertise as someone who needed to simplify her life was like assuming a sleeping dragon was just a large, harmless lizard. They were about to learn the difference between managing elderly relatives and underestimating entrepreneurial genius. But first, they had to complete their campaign to convince me that I was too old and confused to make my own decisions. That campaign was about to reach its peak with Patricia's retirement home brochures and their final ultimatum about my need to face reality about aging. Little did they know that I had been facing reality, the reality of turning their manipulation into my next business venture. What I didn't expect during those first few months after Thomas's death was how quickly Patricia and David would transition from supportive family members to self-appointed life managers who seemed to believe they had the authority to make decisions about my future. It started subtly, with helpful suggestions about simplifying my lifestyle, but gradually escalated into a systematic campaign to convince me that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. The transformation became obvious during what should have been a pleasant family weekend in early spring. Patricia and David had driven up from San Francisco for what they described as a relaxing visit, but which quickly revealed itself as a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to pressure me into accepting their vision of my future. They arrived on a Friday evening with enough luggage for a week-long stay, despite having told me they were planning a simple weekend visit. I watched from my kitchen window as David unloaded boxes of files, a laptop computer, a portable printer, and what appeared to be presentation materials from their car. "Mom," David said as he carried everything up to the guest cottage, "Patricia and I have been doing some research on your behalf, and we wanted to spend the weekend going through some options that might interest you." "What kind of options?" "Living options, financial planning, property management solutions, just different approaches that might make your life easier and more secure." It was a reasonable explanation, but the amount of preparation they had done suggested this was less a casual conversation and more a formal presentation designed to convince me to accept predetermined conclusions. "David, I didn't ask you to research living options or financial planning on my behalf." "I know, Mom, but that's what family does. We look out for each other and help each other navigate complex decisions. You'd do the same thing for us if we were facing a major life transition." The phrase "major life transition" revealed how David was framing my widowhood, not as a personal loss that I needed time to process, but as a logistical problem that required immediate solution through family intervention. Over the following weekend, Patricia and David revealed the full scope of their research and recommendations. They had prepared detailed analyses of retirement communities, assisted living facilities, continuing care campuses, and senior housing options throughout Northern California. They had researched property management companies, estate planning, services, and financial advisors who specialized in helping seniors navigate complex asset management decisions. Most disturbing, they had prepared what amounted to a comprehensive plan for liquidating my current lifestyle and relocating me to what they described as a more appropriate living situation. "Mom, we know this seems overwhelming," Patricia said as she spread charts and brochures across my dining room table. "But we want you to see all the amazing options that exist for people in your situation." "What exactly is my situation?" "Well, you're a 68-year-old widow living alone on a remote property that requires constant maintenance and management. You're dealing with grief, significant financial assets, and the responsibility of maintaining a complex property without the partner who helped you manage it for 30 years. Patricia was describing my life as a series of problems and burdens, rather than as an experience that included both challenges and tremendous satisfaction. She had reduced my relationship with Thomas to a business partnership focused on property management, rather than a marriage that involved emotional, intellectual, and creative collaboration. Patricia, I'm managing the property just fine. I've been actively involved in every aspect of its development and maintenance throughout our marriage. Of course you have. But Victoria, there's a difference between being involved and being the primary decision-maker responsible for everything. You're going from a shared responsibility model to having to handle everything independently. I prefer handling things independently to having other people make decisions about my life. But that's exactly our point, David interjected. You shouldn't have to handle everything independently. There are professional services, community resources, and living arrangements that could provide support while preserving your independence. David was presenting their intervention as a way to preserve my independence while actually arguing that I should give up the independence I currently enjoyed in favor of support that I hadn't requested and didn't need. The weekend continued, with increasingly detailed presentations about why my current lifestyle was unsustainable and why their recommended alternatives would be better for everyone involved. Patricia had prepared a financial analysis showing the costs of maintaining my property versus the costs of various retirement living options. According to her calculations, I was spending approximately $45,000 per year on property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, and improvements, while comparable retirement communities would cost between $60,000 and $120,000 per year, but would include meals, housekeeping, social activities, and medical support. Victoria, when you factor in the value of services provided, plus the social benefits and security of community living, the retirement options actually offer better value than maintaining this property independently. Patricia's analysis ignored several crucial factors. I enjoyed maintaining my property. I had no interest in institutional meals or organized social activities. I valued privacy and autonomy over security and services, and most importantly, my property was an income-generating asset that appreciated in value rather than a pure expense. Patricia, this property generates income from the vineyard, the educational programs, and the vacation rental potential of the guest cottage. It's not just an expense, it's a business asset. But Victoria, those income streams require active management and marketing. Are you really prepared to run a business operation at this stage of your life? I've been running business operations for 40 years. Why would I stop now? Because running a business is stressful and demanding, and at your age, you should be focused on enjoying retirement rather than dealing with the pressures of marketing, customer service, and financial management. Patricia was suggesting that my age automatically made me unsuitable for business management, despite my decades of successful experience in exactly those fields. David reinforced Patricia's analysis with his own research about the challenges of aging in place in rural locations. Mom, I've been reading about the issues that elderly people face when they try to maintain independent rural lifestyles. Things like isolation, limited access to medical care, difficulty with emergency services, and the physical demands of property maintenance. David, I'm not elderly. I'm 68 years old, in excellent health, and living 20 minutes from town with full cell phone coverage and regular contact with neighbors and friends. But Mom, what happens when that changes? What happens when you can't drive safely, or when you have a medical emergency, or when you need regular care? Rural isolation becomes really dangerous for people as they age. David was asking me to plan my current life around hypothetical future limitations rather than my actual present capabilities and preferences. David, I'll address those issues if and when they arise. Right now, I'm perfectly capable of living independently on my own property. But wouldn't it be smarter to plan ahead rather than wait for a crisis? If you move to a continuing care community now, while you're healthy and can choose the best options, you'd be set up for whatever changes come later. The logic seemed reasonable on the surface, but it required me to give up my current lifestyle, based on the assumption that decline and dependence were inevitable, rather than possibilities that might or might not occur. The most revealing part of their weekend presentation came when they started discussing what would happen to my property if I decided to move to a retirement community. Obviously, you'd want to sell the property to fund your new living arrangement, Patricia said, as if this were an obvious conclusion rather than a decision I would need to make. Would I? Well, maintaining an empty property would be expensive and complicated, and the sale proceeds would provide financial security for whatever care you might need in the future. What would happen to the environmental work Thomas and I spent 30 years developing? The new owners would make their own decisions about how to use the property. Maybe they'd continue some of the environmental programs, or maybe they'd develop it in a different direction. Patricia was suggesting that the environmental legacy that represented Thomas's and my life's work was less important than my financial security and her real estate commission. Patricia, this property represents decades of environmental restoration and sustainable living demonstration. It's not just a real estate asset, it's an educational resource and a conservation project. Victoria, I understand that this place has sentimental value, but you have to be realistic about your priorities. Your long-term security and care are more important than preserving a property that you won't be able to enjoy or maintain. Who says I won't be able to enjoy or maintain it? Well, eventually everyone reaches a point where they can't manage complex properties independently. It's better to plan for that transition while you still have choices, rather than waiting until you're forced to make decisions in a crisis. This conversation revealed that Patricia viewed my attachment to our property as sentimental rather than practical, and that she considered my future decline to be certain rather than possible. But what came next showed the true scope of their plans for my property and their role in its development. Actually, David said, Patricia and I have been talking about the possibility of buying the property ourselves if you do decide to sell. You want to buy my property? We want to keep it in the family and honor what you and Dad built here. If you move to a retirement community, we could maintain the property and continue the environmental work while also developing some of the income potential. What kind of income potential? Well, this property would be perfect for ecotourism, boutique hospitality, maybe even a small conference center or retreat facility. We could generate substantial income while preserving the environmental features that are important to you. David was proposing to buy my property and convert it into exactly the kind of commercial operation that he had been arguing I was too old to manage myself. David, if this property has potential for ecotourism and boutique hospitality, why couldn't I develop those opportunities myself? Because, Mom, that kind of development requires significant capital investment, marketing expertise, hospitality, management experience, and the energy to handle a demanding startup operation. Even if you have the financial resources, do you really want to take on that kind of project at your age? David was acknowledging that my property had excellent potential for exactly the kind of hospitality business I had spent my career developing, while simultaneously arguing that I was too old to pursue that potential myself. David, I have 40 years of hospitality management experience. I've literally built and operated exactly the kind of businesses you're describing. But that was when you were younger and had Dad to help with the business operations. This would be a huge undertaking that would require years of intensive work. What makes you think I'm not interested in years of intensive work? Mom, you're 68 years old. Shouldn't you be thinking about slowing down and enjoying your retirement rather than starting a new business venture? David was suggesting that my age automatically made me unsuitable for entrepreneurial ventures, despite my demonstrated expertise and proven track record. Patricia reinforced David's perspective with her own analysis of the practical challenges involved in developing the property. Victoria, Hospitality development involves dealing with county planning departments, environmental regulations, construction management, staff hiring and training, marketing and reservations, food service operations. It's incredibly complex and demanding. Patricia, I've managed all of those operations throughout my career. Why would I suddenly be incapable of handling them now? It's not that you're incapable. It's that this kind of project requires years of sustained effort and attention to detail, plus the ability to handle stress and solve problems quickly. Even capable people find it overwhelming. Patricia was suggesting that I should avoid challenging and rewarding work because it might be overwhelming, rather than recognizing that I might find such work energizing and fulfilling. But the most disturbing aspect of their weekend presentation was how they had begun to position themselves as the responsible family members who were looking out for my best interests, while implying that my resistance to their suggestions was evidence of poor judgment or emotional instability. "Mom, we know this is hard to think about," David said during one particularly condescending conversation. "Losing Dad was traumatic, and making major life decisions while you're grieving is really difficult. We just want to help you avoid making choices that you might regret later." David was suggesting that my grief was impairing my judgment and that my preferences about my own life were potentially mistaken rather than valid expressions of my values and priorities. "David, I'm not making decisions based on grief. I'm making decisions based on what I want my life to look like going forward. But Mom, are you sure you're thinking clearly about what's realistic? Sometimes when people are dealing with loss, they hold on to things that represent their past rather than planning for their future. My property doesn't just represent my past, it represents my ongoing work and my future possibilities. But what if those possibilities aren't actually realistic anymore? What if you're holding on to a lifestyle that made sense when Dad was alive but doesn't make sense for your current situation?" David was suggesting that my lifestyle had been dependent on Thomas in ways that made it impossible to continue, rather than recognizing that I had been an equal partner in creating and maintaining our way of life. Patricia reinforced David's psychological analysis with her own observations about my adjustment process. "Victoria, it's completely normal to want to maintain everything exactly as it was when Thomas was alive. That's a natural part of grieving. But eventually, healthy adjustment means accepting that some things need to change." "What needs to change? Specifically?" "Well, your living situation, your responsibilities, your daily routines. All of those were built around being part of a couple. Now that you're on your own, it makes sense to create a lifestyle that's designed for independent living." Patricia was suggesting that my current lifestyle was inherently unhealthy because it had been designed for couple living, rather than recognizing that I was perfectly capable of independent living in the environment I had helped create. "Patricia, I am living independently. I'm managing my property, my finances, my social relationships, and my daily activities without assistance from anyone. But for how much longer? And at what cost? You're spending enormous amounts of time and energy maintaining a lifestyle that's becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. I'm spending time and energy on work that I find meaningful and fulfilling. But Victoria, there are so many other meaningful and fulfilling activities that you could pursue if you weren't tied down by property management responsibilities. You could travel, take classes, volunteer for causes you care about, develop new friendships and hobbies." Patricia was painting a picture of retirement activities that might appeal to some people, but had no connection to my actual interests or values. She was suggesting that I should give up work I found rewarding in favor of generic senior activities that she assumed would be more appropriate for my age. The weekend concluded with Patricia and David presenting what they called their recommendation for my consideration. "Mom, after looking at all the options and analyzing your situation comprehensively, we think the best choice would be Ocean View Estates, the continuing care community in Santa Rosa. It has independent living apartments for healthy seniors, assisted living services if you need more support later, and memory care facilities if that ever becomes necessary. You want me to move to a continuing care facility that includes memory care? We want you to choose a place that can accommodate whatever changes might occur in your health or capabilities. Ocean View Estates would allow you to stay in one community, even if your needs change. David and Patricia were recommending that I plan my living situation around the assumption that I would eventually need memory care, assisted living, and comprehensive medical support. David, I have no symptoms of cognitive decline, no significant health problems, and no reason to believe I'll need memory care or assisted living. But Mom, none of us knows what the future holds. Wouldn't it be better to be prepared for any possibility rather than assuming everything will stay the same? I'd rather plan for continued health and independence rather than inevitable decline and dependence. But what if that's not realistic? What if you're being overly optimistic about aging? David was suggesting that planning for continued competence and independence was overly optimistic rather than a reasonable approach to life planning. Patricia concluded their presentation with what she clearly considered a generous offer. Victoria, if you decide to move to Ocean View Estates, David and I would be happy to handle all the details of selling this property and coordinating your relocation. We could take care of the real estate transaction, the moving logistics, and help you choose which belongings to keep and which to donate or sell. You want to handle selling my property? We want to make the transition as easy as possible for you. Real estate transactions can be complicated and stressful, especially when they involve properties like this that have unique features and regulatory considerations. Patricia was offering to manage the sale of my property as if this were a favor, rather than an opportunity for her to earn a substantial commission while controlling the terms of the transaction. Patricia, I'm perfectly capable of managing real estate transactions. I've bought and sold properties throughout my career. Of course you are, but this would be an emotional sale, not just a business transaction. Having family members handle the details might be easier than dealing with all the stress and paperwork yourself. Patricia was suggesting that I would be too emotional to handle the business aspects of selling my own property, despite my decades of real estate experience. But what revealed the true scope of their intentions was David's casual comment about their own housing situation. Actually, Mom, if you do decide to sell, Patricia and I have been thinking about making some changes in our own living situation. We've been renting in San Francisco, but we're thinking about buying something with more space and privacy. What does that have to do with my property? Well, if you sell this place, and if the buyer is interested in a leaseback arrangement, we might consider moving up here and managing the property for the new owners. Patricia's real estate business is mostly referral-based now, so she could work from anywhere, and I could probably negotiate a remote work arrangement. David was suggesting that they could buy my property, move into it themselves, and operate whatever business they developed while I lived in a retirement facility an hour away. David, are you asking me to sell you my property so you can live here while I move to assisted living? We're asking you to consider options that would work for everyone. If we bought the property, you'd have the proceeds to fund a comfortable retirement. We'd be able to preserve what you and Dad built here, and everyone would benefit from the arrangement. How would I benefit from losing my home and my life's work so you can live here instead? You'd benefit by having guaranteed financial security, professional care if you need it, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing your property is being maintained by family members who understand its importance. David was framing my displacement from my own property as a benefit I would receive rather than a sacrifice I would make for their convenience and profit. But what I found most disturbing about this entire weekend was how Patricia and David had developed their plans for my future. Without ever asking what I wanted or what would make me happy, they had researched retirement facilities, analyzed my finances, and calculated real estate values, but they had never inquired about my own goals, interests, or vision for my life going forward. They had assumed that being widowed at 68 automatically made me a candidate for managed care and property liquidation, regardless of my health, competence, or preferences. They had decided that their vision of appropriate aging should override my own choices about how to live my life. Most importantly, they had revealed that their concern for my welfare was inseparable from their interest in inheriting and developing my property for their own benefit. But what Patricia and David didn't know was that while they were spending their weekend trying to convince me to give up my independence and relocate to institutional care, I had been spending my months since Thomas's death developing a very different vision for my property and my future. A vision that would honor Thomas's memory and our environmental work, while creating exactly the kind of hospitality business that David had acknowledged was perfect for our location, but with me as the owner and operator rather than them. While they were researching retirement homes, I had been consulting with architects, permaculture designers, and hospitality consultants about transforming our property into a world-class wellness retreat that would combine luxury accommodations with environmental education and sustainable living demonstration. While they were calculating the costs of assisted living, I had been analyzing the market for eco-luxury resorts and developing financial projections that showed potential annual revenues of over $2 million from a carefully planned expansion of our existing facilities. While they were planning my displacement from my property, I had been designing a business model that would make their inheritance expectations irrelevant while providing me with the most exciting and rewarding work of my entire career. But I wasn't ready to reveal any of these plans yet. I wanted to see how far they would go with their campaign to convince me that I was too old and incapable to manage my own life. I wanted to understand exactly what they were planning for my property and my future before I showed them what I was actually capable of achieving. Because while they were researching ways to manage me out of my own life, I was preparing to show them exactly who they had underestimated. Their assumptions about my declining capabilities were about to collide with my next entrepreneurial venture in ways that would make their real estate development dreams look like children playing with toy houses. But first, they had to complete their campaign to convince me that I needed their management and guidance. That campaign was about to escalate into outright manipulation, false expertise, and emotional manipulation that would finally push me to reveal the full scope of my own plans. Little did they know that every condescending suggestion they made about my limitations was actually confirming my determination to prove them spectacularly wrong. The moment that changed everything came on a warm September morning, during what Patricia had scheduled as our final decision meeting about my living situation. Instead of the compliant agreement to their retirement home plans that they expected, it became the morning when I revealed exactly how spectacular their underestimation of my capabilities would prove to be. Patricia had called the week before to arrange what she described as an important family meeting to finalize your transition plans. Victoria, David, and I have found the perfect solution for your situation, and we need to move quickly to secure your spot at Ocean View Estates. They have a beautiful 2-bedroom independent living apartment that just became available, but we need to put down a deposit by Friday to hold it. Patricia, I haven't agreed to move to Ocean View Estates or anywhere else. I know, but Victoria, we've been discussing this for months, and you haven't presented any realistic alternatives. At some point, you need to make a decision instead of just avoiding the inevitable. What's inevitable? The fact that you can't continue living alone on this property indefinitely. You're 69 years old, and maintaining this place is becoming too much for one person to handle safely. Patricia was presenting my future decline as a certainty rather than a possibility, and framing their preferred solution as the only reasonable option rather than one choice among many. Patricia, I'm managing the property perfectly well. For now, maybe. But what happens when that changes? What happens when you have a fall or a medical emergency, or just can't handle the physical demands anymore? If you wait until there's a crisis, you won't have good options. And if I move to Ocean View Estates now, while I'm healthy and capable, what happens to all the work Thomas and I spent 30 years building? Victoria, that work was meaningful when you and Thomas were doing it together. But now it's just a burden that's preventing you from enjoying your retirement and creating unnecessary stress in your life. Patricia was dismissing 3 decades of environmental restoration and sustainable living demonstration as a burden, rather than recognizing it as ongoing work that continued to provide education and inspiration to others. When Patricia and David arrived that Thursday morning, they brought printed contracts, financial calculators, and what appeared to be a comprehensive timeline for liquidating my current life and relocating me to institutional care. "Mom," David said as he spread documents across my dining room table, "we've worked out all the details and everything looks great. You can move into Ocean View Estates next month. We can list this property immediately, and the whole transition can be completed before the holidays." I haven't agreed to any transition. "But Mom, we've been talking about this for months. At some point, talking needs to turn into action. We've found you a perfect place, arranged all the logistics, and worked out the financial details. All you need to do is sign the papers." David was treating my months of resistance to their plans as a prolonged decision-making process that had naturally led to accepting their recommendations, rather than as clear rejections of their entire approach. Patricia reinforced David's framing with her own interpretation of our previous conversations. "Victoria, I know change is scary, but you've had time to research your options and think about what's best for your future. Ocean View Estates really is the perfect solution. It provides security, social opportunities, and professional support while giving you freedom from property management responsibilities." "Patricia, I don't want freedom from property management responsibilities. I want to continue managing my own property." "But why? What are you hoping to accomplish by staying here? You're not hosting educational programs anymore. You're not maintaining the demonstration gardens at the same level. And you're not developing new projects. You're just maintaining things that used to be meaningful when Thomas was alive." Patricia was arguing that my work had lost meaning when Thomas died, rather than recognizing that I was perfectly capable of continuing and expanding our environmental and educational programs independently. "Patricia, I'm continuing all of our programs and developing several new initiatives." "Like what?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when their assumptions about my declining capabilities would collide with the reality of what I had actually been building while they were planning my displacement. "Like the Clearwater Wellness Resort and Sustainable Living Institute that opens for its first guests next month." The silence in my dining room was profound. Patricia and David stared at me as if I had announced that I was planning to fly to Mars. "What?" David finally managed. "I've spent the last 18 months developing our property into a luxury wellness retreat that combines boutique accommodations with environmental education and sustainable living programs. We're launching with 12 guest suites, a full-service spa, organic farm-to-table dining, and comprehensive workshops on permaculture, renewable energy, and ecological restoration." Patricia looked like she was having trouble processing what I was saying. "Victoria, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the business I've been building while you've been researching retirement homes. The Clearwater Wellness Resort is a fully licensed, professionally designed, and expertly marketed hospitality operation that's already booked solid through next spring." David grabbed my arm. "Mom, are you serious? You've been planning a resort?" "I've been building a resort. The guest suites are completed, the spa facilities are operational, the dining pavilion is ready for service, and our first guests arrive in 3 weeks." I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick portfolio that I had been keeping ready for exactly this moment. "What's that?" Patricia asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer would destroy everything they had been planning. "This is the business plan, financial projections, marketing materials, and operational documentation for Clearwater Wellness Resort. Would you like to see what I've been working on while you've been planning my retirement?" I opened the portfolio and spread the contents across the table, pushing aside their retirement home brochures and transition timelines to make room for architectural drawings, financial spreadsheets, marketing brochures, and professional photographs of the completed facilities. The first page showed a stunning aerial photograph of our property that revealed 12 elegant guest cottages scattered throughout the oak groves, connected by stone pathways and surrounded by organic gardens. A beautiful spa pavilion overlooked the lake, with treatment rooms that opened onto private terraces with water views. The restored barn had been transformed into a dining hall with floor-to-ceiling windows and a commercial kitchen capable of serving gourmet meals to 50 guests. "Mom," David whispered, "when did you do all this?" "I've been working on it since 6 months after your father died. The planning, permitting, design, and construction have taken 18 months, and we're opening for our inaugural season in 3 weeks." Patricia was staring at the marketing materials with the expression of someone watching her life savings disappear in a stock market crash. "Victoria, this is impossible. You can't have built a resort without us knowing about it." "I can and I did. While you were researching ways to convince me that I was too old to manage my own property, I was working with architects, contractors, hospitality consultants, and marketing specialists to create exactly the kind of business that you said was too complex for someone my age to handle." I pulled out the financial projections and placed them directly in front of Patricia. "According to our conservative estimates, Clearwater Wellness Resort will generate $2.3 million in gross revenue during our first full year of operation, with net profits of approximately $1.4 million after all expenses, staff salaries, and business loan payments." David was staring at the numbers as if they were written in hieroglyphics. "Mom, are you saying you're going to make over $1 million a year from this property?" "I'm saying I already am making over $1 million a year from this property. We've been taking reservations for 6 months, and we're booked at 85% capacity through next summer. The waiting list for our signature Sustainable Living Intensive workshops extends into 2026. Patricia finally found her voice, though it sounded strained and desperate. "Victoria, this is insane. You can't run a resort by yourself. The licensing requirements, the staffing issues, the insurance complications, it's incredibly complex and demanding." "You're absolutely right. That's why I hired Elena Rodriguez as our general manager. She has 15 years of experience managing boutique resorts in Napa Valley. I also hired Marcus Chen as our head chef. He trained at the Culinary Institute of America and worked at several Michelin-starred restaurants before deciding he wanted to focus on sustainable, farm-to-table cuisine." I pulled out staff photographs and organizational charts showing our complete management team. We also have a spa director with certification in multiple wellness modalities, a permaculture education coordinator with a master's degree in sustainable agriculture, a hospitality coordinator who speaks 4 languages, and a maintenance team that includes both our original groundskeeper and 2 additional staff members with expertise in renewable energy systems and organic farming. David was looking through the staff profiles with the expression of someone discovering that his elderly mother had secretly been running NASA. "Mom, how did you hire all these people? How did you even know where to find them?" "David, I spent 40 years in the hospitality industry. I have relationships with executive recruiters, culinary schools, spa training programs, and sustainable agriculture organizations throughout the West Coast. These are exactly the kinds of people I've been working with my entire career." Patricia was studying the financial projections with the desperate intensity of someone looking for any flaw that would prove the entire plan was unrealistic. "Victoria, these revenue numbers seem incredibly optimistic. How do you know people will actually pay these rates for accommodations in rural Mendocino County?" I smiled and pulled out our reservations report. "Because they already have. We're charging $450 per night for our standard suites and $650 per night for our lakefront cottages, and we're booked solid through next spring. Our Sustainable Living Intensive programs are $2,400 per person for a 5-day experience, and we have a waiting list of over 200 people. But who are these people? Who pays that much money to stay in the middle of nowhere?" Silicon Valley executives who want to disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature. Wellness enthusiasts who are interested in organic farming and sustainable living. Environmental professionals who want to learn cutting-edge permaculture techniques. Wealthy retirees who are interested in luxury accommodations combined with meaningful educational experiences. I pulled out our guest demographic analysis and marketing research. Our target market includes people with household incomes over $150,000 who are interested in experiential travel, environmental education, and wellness retreats. It's a rapidly growing market segment, and we're positioned perfectly to serve their needs. David was shaking his head in amazement. Mom, I can't believe you developed all of this without telling us. I can't believe you spent 18 months trying to convince me to move to assisted living without ever asking what I wanted to do with my life. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. Patricia and David had been so focused on their assumptions about my limitations that they had never considered the possibility that I might have my own plans for my future. Patricia made one final attempt to salvage their vision of my displacement and their inheritance. Victoria, even if this resort idea works initially, it's going to be incredibly demanding. To operate, you'll be dealing with guests 24 hours a day, managing staff, handling marketing and reservations, maintaining facilities. It's going to be exhausting. Patricia, I'm not personally managing day-to-day operations. I'm the owner and creative director, but Elena handles daily management. Marcus runs the culinary program, and our department heads manage their respective areas. My role is strategic oversight and business development. But what happens when guests have problems, or staff have emergencies, or equipment breaks down? You'll be responsible for solving every crisis that occurs. Patricia, I've been solving hospitality crises for 40 years. Emergency management and problem solving are exactly the skills that made me successful in this industry. David tried a different approach. But Mom, what about your health? What about aging? What happens if you get sick or can't manage the business responsibilities? David, I have comprehensive business insurance, a detailed succession plan, and partnership agreements that would allow the business to continue operating if I became unable to fulfill my duties. I've planned for every contingency that you seem to think I'm too old to anticipate. I pulled out our insurance policies and legal documentation. I also have key person insurance that would provide $2 million to the business if something happened to me, plus disability insurance that would cover my income if I became unable to work. Everything you've been worried about is already addressed by professional planning and adequate insurance coverage. Patricia's last desperate attempt focused on the emotional manipulation that had been central to their strategy. Victoria, don't. You think Thomas would want you to be safe and secure rather than taking these kinds of risks at your age? Patricia, Thomas would be incredibly proud that I'm using everything we built together to create something even more meaningful and impactful. This resort honors his memory while providing education and inspiration to hundreds of people who are interested in sustainable living. I pulled out the final piece of documentation, the dedication plaque that would be installed at the resort's entrance. The Clearwater Wellness Resort and Sustainable Living Institute is dedicated to the memory of Thomas Clearwater, whose vision of environmental restoration and sustainable living continues to inspire guests from around the world. David was reading the dedication with tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't understand what you were planning. I'm sorry we underestimated you. David, you didn't just underestimate me. You tried to convince me that I was too old and incompetent to manage my own life, while simultaneously planning to inherit and develop my property for your own benefit. The accusation was direct and undeniable. Patricia and David had been operating from mixed motives. Genuine concern combined with self-interest and assumptions about aging that had no basis in my actual capabilities. We thought we were helping, Patricia said quietly. You thought you were managing. There's a difference between helping someone achieve their goals and trying to convince them to abandon their goals in favor of your preferences. But what came next was the most satisfying revelation of all. Actually, there's one more thing you should know about the resort, I said, pulling out the final document from my portfolio. What's that? David asked. Jessica Chen, Marcus's sister, is our head chef, and Marcus Chen is David's former roommate from college, the one who introduced David to sustainable agriculture and environmental activism before David decided those values weren't financially profitable enough. The irony was perfect. Patricia and David had been trying to convince me to abandon the environmental work that had inspired David's college roommate to pursue a career that would ultimately contribute to my business success. Marcus is your head chef? David asked, in amazement. Marcus is our head chef, and he's thrilled to be working at a place that combines his culinary training with his commitment to sustainable agriculture and environmental education. He says it's exactly the kind of meaningful work he always hoped to find. Patricia looked like she was finally beginning to understand the full scope of what I had accomplished while they were planning my displacement. Victoria, you've built exactly the kind of business that we thought this property could support. Patricia, you've spent 18 months telling me I was too old to build exactly the kind of business I was actually building. The conversation continued for another hour, with Patricia and David gradually accepting that their assumptions about my limitations had been completely wrong, and that their plans for my future had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about my capabilities and intentions. But the most important outcome was David's recognition of how his values had shifted over the years, and his decision to reconnect with the environmental principles that had originally inspired his education and career choices. Mom, I've been so focused on financial success that I lost sight of what actually matters. You and Dad built something meaningful here, and instead of supporting your continuation of that work, I tried to convince you to abandon it. David, it's never too late to realign your priorities with your values. Marcus made that choice when he left restaurant work in San Francisco to come here and cook food that connects people with sustainable agriculture. 3 months later, David quit his tech marketing job and joined our staff as business development director, using his marketing skills to promote environmental education rather than real estate investment apps. Patricia struggled more with accepting that her assumptions about aging and capability had been wrong, but she eventually became one of our most effective marketing partners, referring wealthy clients who were interested in luxury ecotourism experiences. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was seeing the Clearwater Wellness Resort become exactly what Thomas and I had always envisioned, a place where people could experience sustainable living, learn about environmental restoration, and understand that aging doesn't have to mean declining into dependence and institutional care. Our guests include people in their 70s and 80s who are traveling independently, learning new skills, and pursuing meaningful experiences, rather than accepting that their age makes them unsuitable for adventure and growth. The resort has become a demonstration that expertise and capability don't diminish automatically with age, and that the assumption that elderly people need management rather than support is both wrong and harmful. 6 months after opening, we received our first major award, the California Sustainable Tourism Award for Outstanding Environmental Education. The ceremony was held in our dining pavilion, with Marcus preparing a feast featuring ingredients from our organic gardens and wines from our vineyard. During my acceptance speech, I looked out at an audience that included environmental educators, hospitality professionals, government officials, and guests who had traveled from around the world to experience what we had created. This award belongs to everyone who believes that aging should mean growing into wisdom and capability rather than declining into dependence and limitation, I said. It belongs to everyone who understands that the assumption that elderly people need management rather than opportunity is not just wrong. It's a waste of human potential that our society can't afford. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. But the most meaningful recognition came from a letter I received from a guest who had attended one of our sustainable living intensive workshops. Dear Victoria, she wrote, I'm 72 years old, and I came to your resort because my family has been pressuring me to move to assisted living. After spending 5 days learning permaculture techniques, participating in organic farming, and seeing what you've accomplished at age 70, I've decided to start my own market garden instead. Thank you for showing me that my age makes me experienced, not expired. That letter now hangs in my office, next to photographs of Thomas and our original property before we began its transformation. Every morning, I walk through our gardens and guest cottages, greeting staff members who are passionate about their work and guests who are excited about learning sustainable living techniques. I'm 71 years old now, and I've never been busier, more challenged, or more fulfilled. The property that Patricia and David wanted me to sell so I could move to assisted living now employs 15 people full-time and generates enough revenue to support environmental education programs that serve over 1,000 participants annually. The work that they dismissed as a burden that was preventing me from enjoying retirement has become the foundation for meaningful employment, environmental education, and the demonstration that aging can mean expansion rather than contraction. Most importantly, I've learned that the best response to people who underestimate your capabilities because of your age is to show them exactly what those capabilities can accomplish when they're unleashed rather than managed. Patricia was right about one thing. Maintaining this property is demanding and complex. She was wrong about whether that's a problem or an opportunity. When people ask me for advice about dealing with family members who think they know what's best for your life, I tell them this. Don't argue with people who have already decided you're too old, too incapable, or too set in your ways to pursue your dreams. Instead, pursue your dreams so spectacularly that their assumptions become obviously ridiculous. The retirement home brochures that Patricia spread across my table that Thursday morning are now recycled into compost that feeds the organic vegetables we serve to guests who pay premium prices to experience the sustainable lifestyle that my family thought I was too old to maintain, and the business plan that David and Patricia thought was impossible is now generating enough revenue to fund environmental education programs for the next generation of sustainable living practitioners. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well that other people's limitations on your potential become obviously absurd. The Clearwater Wellness Resort proves every day that aging doesn't mean accepting other people's assumptions about your capabilities. It means using your experience, expertise, and accumulated wisdom to create something even more meaningful than what you've already accomplished. What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of turning family assumptions into entrepreneurial triumph resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to let others define their limitations. Because remember, it's never too late to prove everyone wrong about what you're capable of achieving, and it's never too early to start planning your next spectacular success. Age is just the number of years you've had to accumulate the experience and wisdom that make your next adventure possible. The phone call that changed everything came on a quiet Tuesday evening in March, exactly 1 year after Patricia had spread those retirement home brochures across my kitchen table. I was in my office, reviewing applications for our summer internship program, when my phone rang. Victoria, it's Patricia. I need to talk to you about something important. Her voice sounded different, humbler, almost tentative. Nothing like the confident tone she had used when explaining why I needed assisted living. What can I help you with, Patricia? I have a client situation, and I think I need your advice. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had spent months trying to convince me that I was too old and confused to manage my own affairs was now asking for my professional guidance. What kind of situation? I have clients, the Hendersons, who are in their early 70s. Their adult children are pressuring them to sell their property and move to a retirement community. But the Hendersons don't want to leave their home. The children hired me to help transition their parents. But after seeing what you've accomplished, Victoria, I think I've been doing exactly the wrong thing. Patricia was calling to confess that she had been making the same mistakes with other families that she had made with mine, assuming that age automatically meant incapacity and that adult children knew better than their parents about what would die. Make them happy. What do the Hendersons want to do with their property? They want to stay there. They've been talking about starting some kind of artisan craft business, pottery, woodworking, maybe a small gallery. Their children think it's a ridiculous fantasy for people their age. And what do you think now? There was a long pause before Patricia answered. I think their children are making the same mistake I made with you. I think they're underestimating their parents' capabilities and trying to solve problems that don't actually exist. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to tell the Henderson children that I can't help them convince their parents to sell their property. And I'm going to ask the Hendersons if they'd like help developing their artisan business instead of being pressured to abandon it. Patricia was describing a complete reversal of her approach to elderly clients, from helping adult children manage their parents' transitions to helping elderly people pursue their own goals despite their children's concerns. Patricia, that's exactly the right approach. The Hendersons' age and their children's concerns don't automatically make their business ideas unrealistic. I know that now. Victoria, I owe you a huge apology. I spent months trying to convince you that your age made you unsuitable for exactly the kind of project you were already successfully completing. I was completely wrong about aging, about capability, and about what older people are able to accomplish. What changed your perspective? Seeing your resort succeed beyond anything David and I thought was possible. Watching you manage a complex business operation that generates more revenue than most companies in this area. Realizing that everything I thought I knew about aging and capability was based on stereotypes rather than evidence. But Patricia's transformation went deeper than just changing her approach to elderly clients. Victoria, I've been thinking about my own future differently too. I'm 34 years old, and I've been planning my career around the assumption that I need to accumulate enough money to retire comfortably by 65 so I can stop working and enjoy my remaining years. And now? Now I'm thinking that maybe the goal shouldn't be to stop working. Maybe it should be to find work that's so meaningful and fulfilling that I never want to stop doing it. Like what you've created with the resort. Patricia was describing a fundamental shift from viewing aging as decline that requires preparation and management to viewing it as an opportunity for continued growth and meaningful contribution. Patricia, meaningful work at any age is one of the most important factors in health, happiness, and longevity. You're absolutely right to think about creating a career that you love rather than planning to escape from work that you tolerate. Over. The following months, Patricia began specializing in helping older clients develop their property and business ideas, rather than convincing them to downsize and relocate. She became an advocate for what she called aging in opportunity, rather than aging in place. The idea that growing older should mean expanding possibilities rather than just maintaining current arrangements. But the most profound transformation happened with David. 6 months after joining our staff as business development director, David called a family meeting to discuss something he described as a personal and professional revelation. Mom, I need to tell you about something I've learned working at the resort. We were sitting on the deck overlooking the lake, watching guests participate in our evening mindfulness session led by our wellness coordinator. What have you learned? I've learned that everything I thought I knew about success, aging, and meaningful work was completely backwards. How so? For the last 10 years, I've been working in technology marketing, making good money, accumulating assets, and planning for a comfortable retirement. I thought success meant earning enough money to eventually stop working and enjoy leisure activities. And now? Now I see people in their 70s and 80s coming to our resort who are more energetic, more curious, and more engaged with life than I was in my 30s. They're not here because they've stopped working. They're here because they want to learn new skills and pursue new interests. David was describing the same revelation that many of our guests experienced, that aging doesn't have to mean declining into passivity and limitation. David, what do you think makes the difference? Purpose. The guests who seem most vital and engaged are the ones who have found work or activities that feel meaningful to them. They're not trying to retire from life. They're trying to make their lives more purposeful and impactful. And how does that change your own planning? It makes me realize that planning for retirement is the wrong goal. Planning for continued growth and meaningful contribution makes much more sense. David's transformation led to his decision to completely restructure his career around environmental education and sustainable business development, rather than technology marketing and financial accumulation. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the impact our resort began having on other families dealing with similar conflicts about aging and capability. We started receiving calls from adult children who had visited our resort and realized that their assumptions about their parents' limitations might be wrong. We also heard from older adults who had been pressured by their families to downsize or relocate and wanted to explore alternatives that would allow them to pursue their own goals. One of the most memorable conversations was with Margaret Chen, a 74-year-old retired teacher whose daughter had been pressuring her to move to assisted living. Mrs. Clearwater, my daughter thinks I'm too old to live independently in my own home. She's been showing me brochures for senior living facilities and telling me that it's not safe for someone my age to live alone. How do you feel about your current living situation? I love my home. I've lived there for 40 years, I know all my neighbors, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my daily activities. But my daughter keeps talking about what-if scenarios. What if I fall? What if I have a medical emergency? What if I can't drive safely? Margaret, what would you like to do instead of moving to assisted living? I'd like to stay in my home and maybe start the tutoring business I've been thinking about. I could help children with reading and math skills, maybe even teach some adult literacy classes. That sounds like a wonderful way to use your teaching experience. My daughter thinks it's unrealistic for someone my age to start a business. She says I should be focused on enjoying retirement rather than taking on new responsibilities. Margaret, do you think tutoring children and adults would feel like a burden or an opportunity? It would feel like exactly the kind of meaningful work I've always loved doing. I invited Margaret to visit our resort and participate in our Entrepreneurship After 70 workshop, which we had developed specifically for older adults who wanted to pursue business ventures, despite family concerns about their age and capabilities. 3 months later, Margaret launched Wisdom Learning Center, a tutoring and adult education business that operates out of her home and serves over 50 students of all ages. Her daughter, who had been pressuring her to move to assisted living, is now helping her manage the business's marketing and scheduling. Stories like Margaret's became common as word spread about our resort's approach to aging and capability. We began hosting monthly workshops specifically for families dealing with conflicts about older relatives' independence and decision-making authority. The workshops, called Assumptions and Realities, Rethinking Aging and Capability, bring together older adults and their adult children to discuss stereotypes about aging, examine assumptions about decline and dependence, and explore ways to support continued growth and autonomy rather than premature management and institutionalization. One of our most successful workshop exercises involves adult children spending a day attempting to accomplish normal tasks while wearing gloves that simulate arthritis, glasses that simulate vision changes, and earplugs that simulate hearing loss. The exercise helps them understand that physical changes associated with aging don't automatically translate into cognitive decline or inability to manage complex activities. More importantly, it helps them recognize that their parents' adaptation to age-related changes often represents increased competence rather than decreased capability. but the most significant impact of our resort has been its influence on how the hospitality industry thinks about older travelers and what they're interested in experiencing. When we first opened, most tourism industry professionals assumed that travelers over 65 wanted simple, safe, predictable experiences with minimal physical demands and maximum assistance. Our success with adventure hiking, organic farming workshops, advanced permaculture training, and physically demanding sustainability projects proved that many older travelers want exactly the opposite: challenging, educational, meaningful experiences that push them to learn new skills and expand their capabilities. We now host an annual Sustainable Tourism and Active Aging Conference that brings together hospitality professionals, wellness experts, and aging researchers to explore how the tourism industry can better serve older travelers who are interested in growth and adventure rather than comfort and safety. The conference has become one of the most influential events in sustainable tourism, with attendees from around the world coming to learn about our approach to combining luxury accommodations with meaningful educational experiences for travelers of all ages. But perhaps the most personally meaningful recognition came when I received a call from Dr. Sarah Martinez, director of the Stanford Center on Longevity. Ms. Clearwater, we've been following the success of your resort, and we'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference on productive aging and entrepreneurship. I'd be honored to participate. We're particularly interested in your perspective on how assumptions about aging can become self-fulfilling prophecies, and how challenging those assumptions can lead to continued growth and achievement. What aspects would you like me to address? We'd like you to talk about the difference between aging as decline management and aging as opportunity development. Your resort demonstrates that many of the limitations we associate with aging are actually limitations in how we think about aging. The Stanford Conference was attended by researchers, policymakers, healthcare professionals, and business leaders who were working to change societal attitudes about aging and capability. During my keynote speech, I looked out at an audience of experts who were dedicated to helping older adults maintain independence, pursue meaningful work, and continue contributing to their communities. The most dangerous assumption about aging, I said, isn't that our bodies change as we get older. The most dangerous assumption is that physical changes automatically mean cognitive decline, that experience automatically means inflexibility, and that age automatically means we need other people to make decisions about our lives. I continued, when my family tried to convince me that I was too old to manage my own property, they weren't just wrong about my capabilities. They were wrong about what aging means. They assumed that my 68 years represented decline from some earlier peak, rather than 68 years of accumulated experience, knowledge, and wisdom that made me more qualified to tackle complex projects, not less. The standing ovation lasted for 8 minutes. But the most rewarding outcome of the conference was the network of older entrepreneurs, researchers, and advocates who began collaborating on projects that challenge stereotypes about aging and capability. We now host quarterly wisdom and innovation retreats that bring together entrepreneurs over 60 who are launching new ventures, researchers studying productive aging, and investors who are interested in supporting age-diverse startups. The retreats have led to the creation of over 30 new businesses founded by people over 65, ranging from technology companies and consulting firms to artisan cooperatives and educational programs. 1 year after my Stanford keynote, we received our most prestigious recognition, the United Nations Award for Innovative Approaches to Active Aging. The ceremony was held at our resort, with delegates from around the world attending to learn about our model for combining luxury hospitality with educational programs that challenge assumptions about aging and capability. During my acceptance speech, I shared the stage with 3 of our guests who had used their experiences at the resort to launch their own ventures. Margaret Chen, who had expanded her tutoring business into 3 locations. Robert and Helen Kumar, who had started a sustainable farming consulting company. And Janet Williams, who had launched a nonprofit organization providing technology training for older adults. These remarkable individuals prove every day that aging doesn't mean accepting other people's limitations on your potential, I said. They prove that experience, wisdom, and accumulated knowledge are assets that become more valuable with age, not less. As I concluded my speech, I looked out at an audience that included family members who had initially opposed their relatives' business ventures, adult children who had learned to support rather than manage their parents' goals, and older adults who had discovered that their age made them experienced rather than expired. The Clearwater Wellness Resort exists to prove that the question isn't whether people over 65 are capable of learning new skills, managing complex projects, and contributing meaningfully to their communities, I said. The question is whether the rest of us are wise enough to get out of their way and support their efforts. The final standing ovation lasted for 15 minutes. That evening, as delegates from around the world toured our facilities and participated in our programs, I walked down to the lake where Thomas and I had spent so many quiet evenings planning our environmental projects and dreaming about the legacy we wanted to leave. The lake was reflecting the lights from the guest cottages, where people from 6 different countries were staying as they learned about sustainable living, organic farming, and renewable energy systems. The dining pavilion was filled with the sounds of conversation in multiple languages as guests shared their experiences and planned future projects they would implement in their own communities. The spa was hosting an evening meditation session led by Dr. Kim Patel, a 72-year-old former surgeon who had become a mindfulness instructor after retiring from medicine and discovering that teaching stress reduction techniques was more fulfilling than performing surgery. I sat on the dock where Thomas and I had spent countless hours discussing our vision for this property, and I realized that everything we had dreamed about had been exceeded in ways we never could have imagined. We had wanted to create a demonstration site that would inspire people to live more sustainably. Instead, we had created a business that employed dozens of people while providing education and inspiration to thousands of visitors who carried our message back to their communities around the world. We had wanted to prove that environmental restoration and sustainable living were practical and achievable. Instead, we had created a model that was being replicated by resort owners, educators, and community organizations across 3 continents. Most importantly, we had wanted to show that aging doesn't have to mean accepting limitations imposed by other people's assumptions about what older adults are capable of achieving. Instead, we had created a living example that aging can mean using accumulated experience, wisdom, and knowledge to accomplish things that seemed impossible to people who confused chronological age with capability. As I sat by the lake that night, surrounded by the sounds of people from around the world learning and growing and planning their own contributions to a more sustainable future, I realized that Patricia had been right about one thing during that confrontation 18 months earlier. She had said that maintaining this property would be demanding and complex. She had been absolutely correct. What she had been wrong about was whether demanding and complex work was a problem to be avoided or an opportunity to be embraced. The Clearwater Wellness Resort proves every day that the most fulfilling life isn't the easiest life. It's the life that uses all of your accumulated experience, knowledge, and wisdom in service of something meaningful. And sometimes the most satisfying victory isn't proving that you were right. It's creating something so successful that other people's assumptions about your limitations become obviously ridiculous. The retirement home brochures that Patricia spread across my table that day are now part of our educational display about ageism and stereotypes about older adults. And the business that David and Patricia thought was impossible for someone my age is now teaching people around the world that age is just the number of years you've had to accumulate the experience that makes your next adventure possible. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to prove people wrong about your capabilities? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of turning family assumptions into global impact resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to let others define their limitations. Because remember, it's never too late to prove everyone wrong about what you're capable of achieving, and it's never too early to start planning your next spectacular success. The only real limitation is accepting other people's assumptions about what's possible for someone your age. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.